Welcome back to Blue Collar Woodworking. I'm your host, Stumpy Nubs, and this is my loyal sidekick, Mustache Mike. Say hello, Mike.
Hello, Mike.
With the dust collection projects coming to an end, it's time to start on something new. And like any good boss, I try to get the input from the people here at the workshop. So what I did is I took a paper and I passed it around to see what their ideas were on the next project. And I got something back. Of course, this just reminds me of why I never ask anybody their suggestions around here. Joy's suggestion is to make a machine that makes cheeseburger sliders. Thanks, Joy. Randy says we should take a bunch of 2x4s and build them back into a tree. And once again, Randy didn't understand the assignment. Chip's idea is to make a rocket engine for his wheelchair. Now that's not a bad idea, but some things are beyond the abilities of the Stumpy Nubs workshop. So once again, it's up to me to save the world. I'm thinking drum sander. I've seen a lot of these homemade on the internet, and I think they're pretty sweet. But there's some ideas I have on how maybe I can improve on them. So I'm gonna get started on that, and I'll see you in a minute. If I was a drum sander, what would I want to look like? Well, first, I'd like to have a nice smooth drum. I'm thinking 4-inch PVC pipe. With a couple of wooden circles, I can mount a 3/4 inch shaft inside and run it on a pulley. I'll let Stash give you the deets.
Now the shaft will run on a pair of sealed bearings, and they'll be held in place by these flanges. Now most homemade drum sanders have an enclosed side with a bearing on each end to help support the shaft. But on an open-sided design, we need to allow for twice the capacity and half the space. So Stumpy's design will try to mimic the commercial units.
Of course, there's a reason homemade sanders are usually not open-ended, because there's a risk that the drum is going to sag faster than the shop floor when Joy walks by. Now I think I can reduce that risk by using a pair of heavy-duty hardwood supports. As for the shop floor, it's already made of concrete. There's really nothing we can do about it. Now, let's talk plywood. Some people think plywood means low-quality construction, and those people are what we call idiots. Plywood has been used in fine furniture since Ramses the Great commissioned his first royal throne, and if it was good enough for a king's bathroom, it's good enough for me. Actually, plywood can be superior to solid wood in a lot of fine furniture applications, especially where large panels are needed, because plywood has natural stability. That means it stays flatter longer than most solid woods. Of course, you have to use the right kind of plywood, and that's especially the case when making your own jigs, like our drum sander. The best jig-making plywood is, of course, good old-fashioned Baltic birch. I've been to the Baltic, and let me tell you, those Silveckis know their birch. So it's the most stable plywood you can get, and the most expensive. An alternative is MDF. It's very stable, and I use it for a lot of jigs. But when you're building a machine like this, you want a lot of good, strong construction, and MDF doesn't always provide that, especially if you're going to use screws. So oftentimes the best choice is a good cabinet-grade plywood, like those with hardwood veneers. These have more consistent layers and they stay flatter than the less expensive pine plywoods. And at about half the cost of Baltic birch, it's a pretty good compromise. In the last episode, we talked about the smallest of Stanley's common bench planes, the number 3. This time, we're going to talk about the number 4, the beloved smoother that's been in just about every woodworker's toolbox since the Civil War. While the number 3 was built for maneuverability around difficult grain, the number 4 was built for one purpose, to give luxurious, thin shavings on any surface. It's longer and a little bit wider than the number 3 and considerably heavier. That extra bulk translates into more momentum during the cut, producing a smoother surface with less effort. Stanley even made a 4.5, which was a little wider and heavier than the number 4. And modern plane makers today make a high-end bronze version. That extra weight can be a big benefit in a high-quality smoother, if you can afford the extra price. Like any smoothers, you want this to be razor sharp, and then sharpen it again. Chances are any difficulty you're having can be traced back to the sharpness of the blade. The back should be perfectly flat, and you should be able to clearly see yourself in the surface. If you're having any trouble with sharpening, check out our modification video for the WorkSharp 3000 at stumpynubs.com. Stanley number 4s can be picked up all over the place. Antique shops, yard sales, flea markets, and they're usually not that expensive. So you should go for the pre-World War II editions, like with all Stanley planes. Those were just better planes. Of course, usually will take a little bit of tune-up, but after you do, you'll have a great high-quality smoothing plane that's ready to make shavings for another century.
Hence, now what's the difference in a dye and a stain? Well, a dye remains in solution. It's part of it. In other words, it's dissolved, completely dissolved. And when you put it on the wood just absorbs it just like a leather dye or anything else. A stain has binders in it. Binders are typically a little bit of finish. And while they kind of do penetrate some, for the most part, they're kind of designed to lay a little bit more on the surface. Now, when you get into a gel stain, it's got more binder and it's thicker, and it's designed to really lay on the surface. But dyes give you the most clarity. With a stain, you rarely do you ever want to go past 2 coats. And the reason for that is if you go past 2 coats, you don't have enough binder in the stain to really create a finish that's going to bond super tight to the wood. So you want the finish to be able to get through and really bite in good. So, but in the case of a dye, you can put as many coats on it as you want, for the simple reason you're not adding anything to the surface.
Want to impress your friends? Then just go to stumpynubs.com and click on the tab that says Stumpy Store. There you'll find plans for many of the projects you see on Blue Collar Woodworking, and you can help support the show.
So things are moving along on the drum sander construction, and Mike's going to bring you up to speed on it while I leaf through the rocker catalog.
Another design common to homemade drum sanders is the use of a tilting table to adjust the sanding depth. This is a good idea with one drawback. It's awkward to feed long boards into the sander with the table slanted. Stumpy's solution still includes a tilting table, but he reversed the operation. Since most woodworking is done with 3/4 stock, it makes more sense for the table to be flat at that depth and tilt only when you need to increase thickness. That way you're working with a parallel table most of the time.
Tell them about the table adjuster.
There are a lot of ways you can adjust the table, and it's most often done with a threaded rod that pushes up on the table from below, as you crank it. That design presents 2 problems. First, the crank is underneath the table, which makes the adjustments kind of awkward, and they make a compact design much more difficult. The second problem is that it pushes on just a single point under the table, which provides limited support. Now, Stumpy's design calls for a parallelogram lifting mechanism that will give constant support across the width of the table, and it'll allow for the crank placement in the front where it's easier to get at.
Nobody can explain things better than Mustache Mike, which is why you need to see this.
Hey, Blue Collar Woodworking fans, come over here for a second. The boss has given me my 7-minute lunch break, so let's talk for a minute. Now, you all know me as Stumpy's hairy-lipped sidekick, Mustache Mike. But soon I will launch the first high-quality, low-budget spin-off from the Blue Collar Woodworking show. While I'll still be hanging around Stumpy's shop, backing up the boss, he has encouraged me to pursue my own passion for scroll sawing and wood turning. Now the show will be appropriately called Scrollin' and Turnin' with Mustache Mike. For one, we will explore the art of scroll sawing. Many of you might wonder how these amazing saws can enhance your woodworking experience. A lot of you already have a saw, but you have not yet fully embraced what these saws are really capable of. Maybe you want a saw but need a little help getting started. Or maybe you want to work long hours for little pay selling to old ladies at craft shows. Whatever your motivation, turn into Scrollin' and Turnin' with Mustache Mike as we explore why you need a scroll saw, what a scroll saw can and can't do, the different saw designs, blade selection, patterns, sawing techniques, finishes, wood selection, dusts, collections, and accessories. Whew, I'm excited, and that's just a start. We will also explore the wood lathe experience. How many of us have one of these sitting in the corner just begging us to spin out a beautiful bowl, a pen, or a fancy profiled stick? We will get up close and personal with lathe selection, tools, wood choices, and techniques, both for beginners and those with more advanced skills. Look forward to jigs and project plans designed just for blue-collar woodworkers. You will be thrilled and really surprised at what these machines can do as versatile additions to anyone's woodshop. Hey, I never claimed to be the multi-talented, slightly chubby, denim shirt dress pile of wood chips that Stumpy Nubs is, but if you will hang around my corner of the wood shop, I promise we will have some fun and we'll even make a little dust of our own. Okay, the 7 minutes is up, so I gotta go back to work. But remember the show, and also remember this, you can trust Mike because I won't ever pull your stash.
Find everybody's favorite fat little woodworker on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and read his hilarious weekly woodworking blog at stumpynubs.com.
You know, sometimes genius just happens. I mean, I'm sure that I showed promise as a kid. I mean, there was ballet and I did play the harp. But if you would have asked my parents if someday their child would build a drum sander like this, they would have said, "We have a child?" I'm getting a little ahead of myself. While Mike was flapping his stash, I was thinking about this drum sander. And the idea struck me that there's something even handier than a drum sander. A V-drum sander. And do you know what a V-drum sander is? Mike does.
A V-drum sander is essentially a drum sander with the table on the top. Instead of feeding workpieces through to get consistent thicknesses, like a planer, you pass the workpiece over the top of the drum by hand. It's a great way to sand a lot of small pieces.
I refuse to just settle for a regular old drum sander. I want the best of both worlds. Why should the bottom of the drum do all the work while the lazy top of the drum just sits all snug under a cover doing nothing? So, while you were watching that sweet, sweet scroll sawing action, I altered my design to make this a dual-purpose machine. Not only will there be an adjustable table underneath the drum, there will also be an adjustable table on top. But there's still one problem I have with the typical homemade drum sanders: the way the paper attaches. Most use hook and loop sandpaper, which I find to be a pain when you want to swap it out, especially if you do it a lot. So I propose a way to quickly and easily swap out the entire drum, paper and all. I'm going to design a drive mechanism for the drum itself that can be easily disengaged so that the drum will slide off the shaft and can be replaced with another one with a finer grit. After that, we're going to talk more about bearings, motors, dust collections, sandpaper sources, and more on the next episode of Blue Collar Woodworking. Say goodbye, Mike.
Goodbye, Mike.
You know, in our last episode, I gave you some great advice on how to save some money on tools. You're welcome. Some people just don't want to be helped. I mean, here I am, an international celebrity since they picked up the show over in Belarus, And I'm willing to spend my time teaching people how to crawl around on the floor and drool a little bit so they can get a good price on tools. You'd think my email box would be full of thank yous for helping you to save all that money on the drywall screws. But no, instead, I get comments from people shaming me for even suggesting it. I know not everybody appreciates my advice. In this case, I think people fall into maybe one of three categories. Either they think they're too good for drywall screws, they're offended by the word fart, or they take things way too seriously. Look, not everything in life is totally serious. I laugh at Randy all the time, and if I couldn't make fun of Joy for her weight, then how would I deal with my own deep personal self-loathing? And when I say to go whack your neighbor in the head with a shovel to get back the tools he borrowed from you, just because I do it doesn't mean you have to. I realize this show's different, but I feel like not every woodworking show has to be 10 minutes of watching a pair of hands make parts to some project you're probably never going to build. I mean, you already know what wood looks like when it's passing through a table saw. You already have an end table, and life is serious enough. We need to sit back once in a while and mess around. So, to the guy who says he's not watching anymore because the workshop is not a place to mess around, I don't think you're watching anyway. Because if you were, you'd know that we don't mess around when the power tools turn on. And to the person who says that my ego is too big, I want to come visit you in humorless land, where nobody gets the joke and every woodworking show is the exact same thing with the exact same personality. Not everything you see on the internet is as it seems. Mike's mustache is actually real. And the ego? That's just part of my sophisticated humor. And it goes down best when you sit back and have yourself a cold one. Because you've earned it, my friend. Hello? I'm right in the middle of filming. In fact, the camera's on right now.
Which will be held in place by these flanges. Those are flanges.
You think we've done this a few times? Seal bearings, flanges.